From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host.
Has Hillary Clinton on his speed dial and has Barack Obama's kids working for him.
Brad Mendenhall.
Hey kids, it is episode 240 of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. Joe the lawyer from the excellent YouTube show Common Sense Academy returns to talk about the Bill Cosby case. Warning, there is a chance you're going to get mad. I know I did. Anywho, Katie has a question.
If you could be on the crew of any fictional vessel, what would it be?
Okay, this is, as always, another good one. I'm gonna say the Star Trek Enterprise, or the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek, The Next Generation. And I'll say this for one reason. Most times when you're on a vessel, it's hard living. I'm thinking of, I much more enjoy Firefly over Star Trek. However, it would suck being on the Serenity because it's a hard life. With Next Generation and Star Trek and really all the Star Trek properties in general, it's sort of a relaxed, enjoyable adventure where it's about meeting new cultures, and as long as you're not wearing a red shirt, you're probably going to make it out alive. So that's a great question, and it's not because Star Trek is my favorite franchise, but it's just like, yeah, that's the way to go. Because being on the Millennium Falcon, although you get to hang out with Han Solo, that thing's falling apart half the time. So that's what I'm going to say.
Excited, returning to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, one of my favorite YouTube shows, and it does such a great job. Joe the lawyer from the Common Sense Academy. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Brad. Thanks for having me on. Lots been going on in my world of sovereign citizens and law, etc. But I think we're here to talk about a specific topic. Is that correct?
That is correct. But first, it always tastes better when we sip together, so let's have a mutual sip.
Let's do it.
Clink.
Cheers.
What are you drinking?
Chocolate milk.
Oh, nice. I am drinking a gin and tonic with aviation gin, so I'm hoping that Ryan Reynolds catches word of this and wants to be on the show.
I hope so too, Brad. You got an adult drink and I have a child's drink.
I reached out to you because Bill Cosby is out of jail.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that on my 2021 bingo card.
I don't think anyone did.
And I'm not a lawyer. Listen, my legal expertise comes from, I read a bunch of Grisham novels, and I'm a fan of The Good Fight. I don't pretend to have any expertise on this. But whenever there's a big celebrity trial that ends up with the person in jail, as rare as that happens.
Sure.
Every 3 to 6 months, there's some story about, OJ is trying to get his conviction overturned. Or Phil Spector, up until his death, they always have their vocal group of supporters who's like, oh, this is going to be the one that gets him out. And it never happens because there's so many avenues to take to be exhausted, asking for a new trial, asking for whatever it is. They would always talk about Cosby trying to get his conviction overturned, but I never thought it would happen. And then just one day, it's like, yeah, he's out. I was like, what happened? You're a lawyer, and you're a Pennsylvania lawyer, and this all happened in PA. I wanted to ask you about your take on this, because it seems mad, but it does seem like this is something that so many wheels were set in motion years and years, if not a decade plus ago, and it all came out and shook out in his favor. So I really wanted your take on this.
Sure. Do you want to do a quick summary, Brad, of what happened so that everybody kind of understands, and then I can give you an opinion and we can sort of go from there?
Yeah, please. That'd be wonderful.
First of all, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and I did not read the opinion, but I've actually done a decent amount of this work, and I may get a couple of facts here and there wrong, but I definitely understand overall what happened. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned Bill Cosby's conviction and said he cannot be tried again on this case. Usually, like you said, a lot of times what defendants in that situation are looking for is to get a new trial, get a second bite at the apple, because they will say, well, something was unfair about my trial. This went wrong or that went wrong. Therefore, my trial was unfair, so I need a new trial. But the PA Supreme Court here, Pennsylvania Supreme Court, said that's not applicable here. That would not be a remedy. The only possible remedy here is for the conviction to be overturned and for Cosby more or less to go free, and he cannot be tried again on this case. I don't know exactly how they stated it, but that's what happened. Now, the reason, again, I'm going to do this sort of quick and dirty, is the reason is back in, and I can't remember all the dates. But let's start here. This trial that Bill Cosby was convicted on was for a sexual assault on a single woman, right? And everybody in the media, us as media consumers, we think, oh, Bill Cosby, he did it to 50 or 60 women. Yeah, there's allegations out there for 50 or 60 women. But what's happened is some of those were in the 1980s. Maybe even the 1970s, 1990s, early 2000s. So by the time that this came to light, which was, I believe, 5 or 6 years ago when things started really boiling over for him, the statute of limitations had ran on most of those women. So there was only, well, I don't want to say that. I've heard that there are a couple other women out there with allegations whose statute of limitations have not run. So this may not be over. They may go after him with a different victim, but that would be a completely different case.
It'd be starting from the beginning all over again.
Correct. I mean, if you commit 5 crimes against 5 different people, that's 5 different cases. It's possible in certain situations, depending on the facts, that could all be taken care of in a single trial, but that wasn't the case here. One trial, against one with an allegation of one woman. All right. So this particular woman, back in 2015, when these allegations came to light, there was a civil lawsuit. She had a civil lawsuit, and she was also in touch with the district attorney, who is the prosecutor in Montgomery County, which is in Pennsylvania, right? Montgomery County. I'm in Pittsburgh, PA, which is on the western part of the state. Bill Cosby's from the Philadelphia area. Montgomery is right outside Philadelphia County.
Yeah, I used to spend a little bit of time in Monco. There was a very good community college there where I would take some night classes to help get my degree a little earlier than I would have otherwise. So yeah, I know that area. I spent a lot of time there, so it's weird just hearing that. This is where so much of this craziness centers from.
It is bizarre when you're where you've been or where you're from becomes the center of some national attention. That is where the assault would have taken place, because that's where a trial is going to be held for a crime. Is that most of the time the physical location where the assault took place. I believe Cosby lived there, so that's where the assault allegedly took place. So this woman comes forward, and don't quote me, I could be wrong on these dates. I was a little rushed today. I didn't pull everything up. Around 2015, several years ago, before the trial. That's all that really matters. She comes forward with these allegations, and she starts a civil case against Bill Cosby. And she's also talking to the prosecutor, the district attorney of Montgomery County, Bruce Castor, about a possible criminal case. So she put these allegations forward. She's got a civil attorney. I believe they had already filed suit. And she's also talking to the district attorney about pursuing him criminally.
Joe, how common is that to basically try to file a civil case the same time you're doing a criminal case? I imagine that's most frequent when they're accusing someone of means, possibly because the way the judicial system and works is like it's going to be a lot easier to get them for money than it would be necessarily to get them put away, because you can speak to this a lot better than I can. It's not always the same justice system for people who aren't rich.
That's true. And you kind of, you nailed it there when you said people of means. And let me stress this as well. And I'll go back to the question, but you said it's not the same justice system for people with money and people who don't have money. But it's also important to understand a civil case and a criminal case are actually very different. And so the burden of proof in the criminal case, everybody's familiar, you have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. So the prosecutor has to have, doesn't actually have to, but the law says we're beyond a reasonable doubt, which is, we can't say this in court, but I talk about this sometimes, is 80% certainty, right? The jury has to be sitting there and say, look, we think that the allegations are true, at least 80%, if you had to put a percentage on it, okay? Like, we're that sure. How sure are you? Well, I'm 80% sure. Okay, then convict the person. That's reasonable doubt. But in civil court, it's called a preponderance of the evidence, which is literally 51%. The language used in the court system is more likely than not. That's a much lower burden of proof. So you went from 80% in criminal to 51% in civil.
So, sort of like the difference between definitely and probably.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yep. But that's pretty big difference too, right? It was pretty big. Yeah, that's a good way to state it, Brad. So how common this is? Well, it depends. Number one, like you said, is a victim of a crime going to sue somebody who is very poor or doesn't have means? Probably not. Mostly because a lawyer's not going to be interested in that case. And they're not going to pay a lawyer $1,000 to sue somebody, or $10,000 or $20,000 to sue somebody where you'll never get a penny of that money back. Most of the time, petty sort of assaults, things like that, a lawyer is going to be like, no. Now, if it was a person of means, that's a different story, right? The attorney's going to be interested because they know if we nail that guy or girl with a judgment, we're going to be able to enforce it. They got millions of dollars, real estate, assets, etc. That's why a lot of these big stars are sometimes able to make criminal actions go away. Because if they give the victim an overwhelming amount of money, the victim's going to zip it up and that's it. The way it usually goes, though, is there will be a criminal case, and these are for certain crimes only, but yeah, sexual assault and assault type crimes. There will be a criminal case. Most of the time, the attorneys involved are going to want to see the criminal case play out and then see if the defendant, the person accused of the bad act, is convicted. And if they're convicted, it's open and shut for the civil case. Then you start to think about the civil case, and then you say, is it worth filing suit, etc. That's sort of the norm. That's how most attorneys do things, but every situation is different. My understanding here is that she was sort of pursuing both of them at the same time, or had already started the civil action, which, to be perfectly honest, I don't think that's the way to go. However, if you're dealing with someone like Bill Cosby, you have more bargaining leverage if you file the civil suit and then, I hate to say it, ladies, and then you dangle the criminal case over his head. Look, listen, Mr. Cosby, we're already coming at you with a civil suit. We're also going to come at you with a criminal suit. Give us X amount of dollars. That's kind of what happened here. This woman and I'll get to it, is she in a way, and I'm not saying that she meant it to be this way, because there's a lot of people involved in these decisions and a lot of lawyers involved, and lawyers can influence what happens greatly with the victim. The victim may not even fully understand the rights that she's giving up. This case here, and some of these details may be off, but the general push is correct. She's thinking about, or has already started, a civil case. She's thinking about a criminal case, which has not been started. Her attorneys, her lawyers are in touch with the prosecuting attorney in Montgomery County, Bruce Castor. Bruce Castor is in touch with Bill Cosby and his lawyers. Okay, so all the lawyers are in communication. What happens is Bruce Castor, likely from discussions with her lawyers, talks to Bill Cosby's lawyers and says, if you testify in a civil deposition, we will not pursue criminal charges in this case. There's some question here about whether he really made a promise there, but there were discussions, and then he also made a public statement. I could pull it up and look at the exact language. He also made public statements that they were not going to pursue the case because Bill Cosby was going to testify in the civil case. What the victim gained from that agreement, and Bill Cosby's attorneys agreed, was her civil case became much, much stronger. They had the deposition. Bill Cosby more or less admitted to criminal conduct in that interview. And then eventually that case settled, and Bill Cosby paid her an undisclosed amount of money, probably millions of dollars. And Bruce Castor, who was the district attorney at the time and also one of Trump's impeachment attorneys.
Good people just keep showing up everywhere, right?
Right. He kept his word and did not pursue the criminal case. Couple of years go by because of all the allegations, more allegations coming out against Cosby. Media pressure is growing. Political pressure is growing. The public and all the victims here are incensed because they want some justice from Bill Cosby. Bruce Castor, and I don't know whether he was lost in an election or if his term was up, but he was out as Montgomery County District Attorney. A new district attorney came in whose name escapes me. This new district attorney said, we're going to move forward with this case. Now, one of the things that people said to me was, well, did this district attorney who came in do something wrong? My answer is no, because what happened with Cosby and Constant and Castor is sort of a very complicated legal scenario. This new DA, when he comes in, he was in a good faith attempt to enforce the criminal laws, brought this case against Bill Cosby under the color of law. Did you get his name, Brad?
Yeah, Kevin Steele. And this is a little something I heard on the Opening Arguments podcast, where it's pretty interesting because Kevin Steele was in this situation where, and there was this huge upswell against Cosby because of Hannibal Buress, his comedy thing sort of reminded everyone about Cosby's behavior. The Me Too movement happens. And Kevin Steele's like, hey, should I be filing charges? It's sort of like my understanding as a layman was Castor said we're not going to prosecute, but that was like a personal promise or a promise of him specifically that he wasn't going to get that civil testimony. But Steele was not, or at least from Steele's perspective, he was not beholden to that promise. Like it wasn't a promise that forever you will never be pressed charges. Just Castor saying, I'm not going to press charges, and Steele like saying, well, I am. That's a lot of where the problems have come from, or why we're now in this situation.
The Supreme Court disagreed. They said it was a promise. My understanding as well, again, I've read a couple of articles. I didn't go in depth on this, but they brought this issue up. Cosby's attorneys brought this issue up during the trial, and the trial judge disagreed with Cosby's attorneys. They said no. So after the trial, when they were convicted, and you have to raise an issue at trial in order to bring it up on appeal. So they preserved the issue properly, brought it up on appeal, and took it to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The thing here, I would say, it was a 78-page opinion. Maybe if we want to do a follow, if I can sit down, I just don't have the time to read that. I have so much other stuff I have to read. But more or less, I know what the court said was it was a violation of due process. And due process is actually a bit of a strange thing in the law because the Constitution does not specifically mention due process, but the Supreme Court has said from all of the rights guaranteed by the Constitution that if you read into them enough, due process is guaranteed. And due process basically says that you have the right to a fair proceeding. What the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decided, and yeah, when Steele came in, he was probably like, well, Bruce said this or that, but it wasn't an agreement that my office is beholden to. But the Supreme Court said no. Castor made this promise as part of the Montgomery County District Attorney as that office, more or less, and Cosby gave the testimony reliant on that promise. And that's actually important because from a contract perspective, like you only really have a contract if both parties get or give something. Castor gave up the right to prosecute, and Bill Cosby gave that testimony. That's why it's a binding contract. That's why the Supreme Court is saying that he cannot that a new trial is not the correct remedy. He can no longer have a fair trial on this particular case because of the testimony he gave. And I think, too, that it has a lot to do with the fact that Cosby then went out and incriminated himself, relying on the district attorney's promise. If there was like a promise that didn't involve like direct testimony from the person accused of the crime, then maybe the Supreme Court would have come down differently. But that's another right guaranteed by the Constitution, is the right to not incriminate yourself, right? The Fifth Amendment right to stay quiet, right? Everybody, I plead the fifth. I plead the fifth. Bill Cosby surrendered a fundamental right in order to get the promise from the DA, a fundamental constitutional right to get the promise from the prosecutor that he would not prosecute.
The thing that surprised me so much when the trial was happening was that civil testimony being used against Cosby. And I'm like, how on earth is this in here? And I remember somebody saying, because people love Bill Cosby. And I remember somebody saying, it's like, well, this is a he said, she said. I was like, have you listened to the testimony? It's Cosby against himself. It's a he said, he said. The things that he said in that civil testimony, and was so damning. I just couldn't believe that. And I was so surprised. And again, layman, how is this getting into court? Because I was like, I would just figure that if you're giving testimony that damning, there's no way in a civil testimony knowing about the Fifth Amendment, it's like there's no way you would give that without promises or understanding that, hey, this isn't going to be used against you. And it turns out that's a big reason why he's free right now, is because, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is like, you can't do that.
That's it. That's sort of it in a nutshell. A lot of parties involved in this. And my opinion is, as a criminal defense attorney, I believe that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court got it right. And one of the problem, perhaps the biggest problem, is that the law was not clear on this when things were happening back in 2015, right? There was no good precedent for Bruce Castor or Andrea Constand's attorneys to rely on while all of this was going on. Number one, issues like this are rarely written into statutory law by the legislature. And issues like this we only get clear law on them whenever they go to the Superior Court or they go to the Supreme Court and then they issue an opinion. There are instances. So I'll give you an example, something that happens in court all the time. is I'm a defense attorney. I sign with the district attorney what's called a tentative plea agreement. So we'll make agreements early on in the case, but they're specifically written so that either party can get out at any time. Generally, it's extremely difficult to get a judge to hold the prosecution to their end of that bargain if they pull out. Extremely difficult. That's why I think the fact that he was actually giving Fifth Amendment testimony played so much of a role in the court's decision. Like, wow, the prosecutor said, well, we won't prosecute if you go ahead and incriminate yourself. And he did. That's why, again, that the court's saying there can't be a fair trial on this case any longer, or that the agreement is binding forever. It's gone. Like, you cannot prosecute. Like, the DA said this, they got something big in return, and poof, it's gone. Bruce Castor, back when this happened, he could have said to everybody involved, F off, or go kick the bucket, I'm going to prosecute. If he wants to prosecute on a case, he doesn't have to make a deal with anybody. District attorneys have a tremendous amount of discretionary power. But he was in a position where maybe he believed that he could help the victim get something that she wanted that perhaps was more important to her than the actual criminal prosecution. We'll never know, because this comes down to discussions between her and her lawyers. But like, what they believed, when they walked away from that deal, and then Cosby gave the testimony and then she got the money, like, were they under the impression that he could still be prosecuted? I find it hard to believe that they were, but I don't know.
I'm sure there was those discussions in that consideration. It's like, okay, a terrible thing happened to this woman. Listen, from Cosby's own testimony in that civil trial, I think it's very hard to argue that something wretched did not happen to this woman. Like you, my memory's a little foggy because, honestly, there were so many accusations against Cosby.
Sure.
My understanding was that he was a sort of a family friend who took advantage of her.
Yeah. Right.
What is the value of him going to jail to her at that point? Or, okay, he can be punished by the pocketbook, and then she can get the therapy that's needed, get whatever help is needed, and also financially help her children, her family. It's sometimes that people who take those sort of agreements are looked down upon. It's like, oh, well, if this athlete or this actor did such a horrible thing, why would you take the money and sign a non-disclosure? It's like, you know what? We always want to pretend that we're above taking money over someone being thrown in jail. But knowing that you have the money to get the help you need, because if Cosby just goes straight to jail and people can suffer emotional disturbance by what happened to her, you need help for that. Also, knowing, hey, this terrible thing that happened to me is a terrible thing. I'm going to get help. And also, I will know that my children will be able to attend college. That's a real thing. Money really works very well in America to help us move forward in life. Also, knowing it wasn't a slam dunk case without that testimony.
That too. That's a huge part of this.
What if they file criminal charges and he's acquitted? Stop me if I'm wrong. That's going to make the civil trial more challenging, even though there is a different.
Yes.
The lawyer would say he's been declared innocent, even though that's not really what it is. These are complicated things. We all saw what happened with O.J. Simpson in the Nicole Simpson murder trial. The little rascals who allegedly killed his wife and got off. Fame helps you get away with stuff. And this is before the Me Too movement. And it's Cosby. We all loved Bill Cosby.
Yes.
I got a few years on you, I think, Joe, but you've seen reruns of The Cosby Show. He was America's dad.
Yeah, I watched him as a kid. I watched it. I was like 10 or so, and there were still some. Yeah, I watched them. Absolutely.
Going up against the rich guy who's beloved and America's dad, it's not like Charlie Sheen. It's not somebody who's sort of their reputation as being a scumbag. It's this really likable guy. So I get why you would take that deal if it was presented to you. Stop me if I'm wrong. What can really help with something like this is the more people that come forward, the more people that are able to testify can help a conviction or prosecution happen. That's why people of means pay for the non-disclosure agreements and pay the millions of dollars to get out of these situations to keep these things from snowballing.
There's rules of evidence, and there's a rule in Pennsylvania. Every state has it, every federal court, and it means evidence cannot be brought in against a defendant of prior bad acts unless there are certain exceptions. But the idea is, let's say, for instance, let's take Bill Cosby out of it. You have somebody who was convicted of bank robbery twice in the past, and now they're on trial for bank robbery a third time. And the idea is that they can't get a fair trial if you tell the jury about the other 2 times that the person was convicted of a bank robbery. So that those things are generally not allowed in a trial. And as you may know here, Brad, the judge here sort of split the baby. He allowed one prior victim of Cosby's to testify in addition to the victim who the case was actually about, but did not allow a parade of women to come in and say that Cosby did this. And that's solely within the discretion of the trial judge. But prior bad acts are generally not allowed unless they fall into certain exceptions, which I think is why the judge allowed one of them in, because one of the exceptions is what's called the modus operandi exception. If a criminal has a certain a flavor or a character,
A pattern,
you got it, a certain pattern of what they do, you got it, Brad, then you can bring in that prior act if it followed that pattern. And apparently Cosby had a signature pattern here that he used. But also what happens too is people, especially in a case like this, right? Like Cosby, when you weren't going to have a jury pool who hadn't already been tainted, right? So if the more women come forward, as long as it's getting out in the news, then and it spreads enough around the country, it's like I doubt anybody who sat in that jury had or only thought that there was 1 or 2 accusations against him, right? If 60 accusations, then you're being tried in the court of public opinion, and then that can taint the jury. And with big national cases, judges just have to say, well, there's really nothing they can do about that, but they still have to have the trial. There's ways to rehabilitate a person on the jury. You could say, well, are you able to set these things aside? Yes, I am. Are you able? Well, yeah, the person's going to say that, but it doesn't actually mean that they can. And the information is still in their brain when they're sitting there watching. I mean, it takes a truly enlightened soul to like set aside these other bad things that they heard and just look at this particular case. And it's arguable that that's not even possible. That played a role here as well. As far as the non-disclosures, and like you said, with the money, overall, the Me Too movement was a very positive thing in this country that happened. But one of the things that was, and I'm an attorney and I've drafted NDAs, right? I've drafted NDAs. I have like 50 of them on my computer. I think we should be careful about, there's like this fervor. It's like, oh, non-disclosure agreements are bad, bad, bad. Like that was part of the Me Too movement, or at least like a small element of it. And I'm sitting here as an attorney. I'm like, whoa. Like, let's slow our roll here a little bit. Like, yeah, the Me Too movement is a very good movement, but I don't know if we should be bashing at non-disclosure agreements because of what you said, Brad. I mean, you nailed it. Like, what if Cosby, let's say this woman says, nope, I'm not making an agreement. Cosby goes to trial, wins, he's acquitted. Now she's lost any leverage that she has in order to get a financial settlement. And then Cosby went free and she's got $0 in her pocket. Nobody wins in that situation. The instance of a particular individual, she knows what's best for her. And if she makes this choice, now, if she's making the choice in a way in which she's not informed, that's completely different. But if she understands, if a victim understands the consequences of signing the agreement, then I don't think it's a bad thing if there's good lawyers involved, etc. Another thing, this is me, but I think kind of what happens too is, and what happened in Me Too a couple of times, like these women would sign an NDA, and then all this negative publicity would come out against the attacker, and then all of a sudden they start to have second thoughts. You can't have that after the fact thought. It's like you signed an agreement. But I think a lot of that perhaps comes from social pressure. I mean, because it's in the newspaper, it's on TV, it's in the media. Everybody's saying, oh, you shouldn't have signed this NDA. This person's so bad, they need to go away. And then you, as the person who signed the NDA, the wheels might start to turn in your head like, oh, I wish I hadn't signed that, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's a very complicated thing.
Well, hindsight's 2020, because when you signed the NDA, the world was different. Harvey Weinstein is the real biggest and most famous case, possibly even more than Cosby, because Harvey Weinstein was an unbelievably powerful person, unbelievably rich, who knew how to manipulate the media and had very powerful friends. It's very easy to say now, it's like, oh, you should have not signed that NDA and testified against Harvey Weinstein. It's like, Harvey Weinstein destroyed careers easily. Okay, go against one of the most powerful people in Hollywood, who's like has Hillary Clinton on his speed dial and has Barack Obama's kids working for him. Yeah, go up against that one when you're a struggling actress living in a one-bedroom flat with 3 roommates in Hollywood. Yeah, that sounds great. And it's very easy now to say, hey, you should have gone against them. It's like, no, your career would have been destroyed. Now you got that, signed the NDA, you got the settlement, you were able to continue your career, hopefully, and help get a living for yourself. So, and I understand the desire afterwards, like, oh, I wish I didn't, because you don't know how the world's going to change, but NDAs can be really important, and they can be valuable to people, and they're not always an instrument for evil.
I have no doubt that some of the people after the Me Too movement didn't truly understand what it meant when they were signing the NDA. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't have. They should have, and if they had attorneys. And I think that's really important from the perspective of my profession, that lawyers need to really be clear about exactly what the person is giving up when they're signing the NDA, because people may instead of reading the 78-page document, they might say, you're my attorney, give me the broad strokes. And the lawyer does that, and then they sign it. And then even if it's in there, honestly, like they may not have known. What a court will say, though, is you signed it, you should have known, especially you had counsel, blah, 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 an opportunity to read, etc. The thing that I focused on was the prior bad acts part of this case, because that was highly publicized while the trial was going on, and I wasn't following it that closely. And so what a lot of attorneys were saying is, oh, it may get overturned because the judge allowed this one prior victim in. So that was another appealable issue in Cosby's case. But because the PA Supreme Court, they made a decision on the agreement around Castor, etc., they never got to that issue. But he might have been able to argue that issue as well.
And I think even the dissenting opinion on the case, that the dissenting even said is like, hey, I don't think we should have overturned on that. However, the other issue I might have agreed to.
Yeah.
But would that have been this sort of dismissal with an inability to refile, or would that have been a mistrial and they would have gone back to the drawing board?
That almost certainly would have been a new trial, a mistrial, and they would have remanded, granted the right to a new trial, almost certainly.
Were you expecting there to be a retrial on this? Were you surprised that, or did this really make sense from a legal perspective?
Well, I wasn't following closely enough, Brad, to even know that issue was up by the Supreme Court, to be perfectly honest. When I first heard it, I thought it was on that prior bad acts, like the additional woman that they allowed to testify. And then I read it, And I discussed it. So I'm in a couple of forums, like on Facebook and different social media. And it's just me and like a lot of different criminal defense attorneys. And we bounce ideas around. It's a really great resource. We all discussed it. I can tell you the defense attorneys, and we're biased, obviously. We defend people like Mr. Cosby.
Which is a good thing. I know lawyers get a bad thing. Bill Cosby should have legal representation. It's very important because if Bill Cosby doesn't have legal representation, if he doesn't have lawyers going to bat for him, we're all screwed.
If the court doesn't protect the right of one, they're not going to protect the rights of many. This decision just created new fundamental constitutional rights, more or less, or at least a newly discovered one, for every citizen of Pennsylvania. There's a couple of sayings. We can get into this more because I've had this discussion because a lot of people have asked me about this, Brad. What some people say, and this is reasonable to disagree, is it's worse to convict one innocent person than to put 100 guilty people in jail, right? It's like, let 100 guilty people be free before you convict one innocent person. The whole is greater than the part. It's unfortunate that under these circumstances, the court had to articulate this piece of due process, okay, that was not articulated in the past, because I think most people will agree Cosby, justice should probably see him in jail.
Oh, there's no reason he should be out. And the first time when they announced he has a comedy show, my head's gonna explode. Because he was talking about how he wanted to do a tour to talk about, I wish I could remember the exact term, but he wanted to do some sort of tour giving lessons about how to respect women. It's like, who the hell are you? I'm not a psychologist. I've not had any personal conversations with Bill Cosby. He really seems to believe he's innocent, which is painful.
That's the important thing, is that it's already been distorted by the media, is that this decision by the Supreme Court it frankly has nothing to do with guilt or innocence. It has nothing to do. The Supreme Court did not say Bill Cosby is innocent. And in fact, a jury of his peers said that he is guilty. On top of that, his sentence was only 3 to 10. And he had already done in 3 years. He was up for parole in less than a year. So he had already done some jail time over a year, I think close to 2 years or something. I'm not saying that should be satisfactory, but some people might say he shouldn't have done any because his rights were violated. So it's not like he got away without losing a pound of flesh here. He did do some jail time, and that happens a lot. Defendants will sit in jail for a year before their trial date, depending on their particular circumstances. And then if they win, they lost a year of their life. Bill Cosby is going to run. Of course, he's going to run with this and say that he's innocent. I mean, of course, he almost has to go on with life, but that's not what it is.
Felicia Rashad has caught a lot of heat, justifiably, because saying it's a great wrong has been righted, and very heavily implying he was innocent the whole time, and now everyone addressed no. I believe the foreperson for that trial actually released a statement saying no, we are very proud of our decision, and we did the right thing, and not guilty isn't innocent. An overturned conviction doesn't mean, he was such a great guy. I can understand the idea that if, God forbid, if I were to be in some sort of similar situation, which I really hope that isn't in the cards.
It's frustrating that this person who's obviously done terrible stuff is out free. And I think we would all prefer that wasn't the case. But it's something that can protect all of us, because I understand why it happened.
Let me just say a few things. Things can be done. So number one, I think we can't stress how I understand how difficult it is, and it needs to be made easier and less invasive. But victims of crimes need to come forward as soon as possible. because it gives law enforcement and attorneys involved the most options to do something. Like you said, the world changed and the world is different now. But I think that it's important to let's keep that in mind. Like if we can come forward with things as fast as possible. The other thing too is it actually helps law enforcement because they can gather evidence before it's gone or before it's dissipated or hidden or who the heck knows. Personally, I think that prosecutors, like the role Bruce Castor played, and look, it's such a tough call because he probably believed that he was helping this victim in a way, right? And again, it's like, what was her mindset at the time? What's her mindset now? Who knows? Maybe she regrets the decision. But I personally think that district attorneys should sort of stay out of civil proceedings like that. They often see themselves as, and I know this from my personal experience, as representing the rights of the victim in the crime. And that's part of their role. But their actual role, the real role, is to represent the entire society. They're enforcing the crimes in order to or criminal laws in order to benefit the whole society. And sometimes district attorneys make decisions contrary to the victim's will or what the victim wants. And they have the power to do that. So I think that the role of a district attorney, that they should, of course, take victims' intents into account, but I think they should stay out of civil proceedings. Like a civil proceeding should not impact what they do or don't do. They should make the decision based on what they think is right, etc.
And I always forget his name because I don't know, because screw him. The director of Rosemary's Baby, who was accused of rape and then fled the country and now lives in France because he felt the judge was going to lay down a more stringent conviction than he was expecting. The victim in that case, who was like 13 years old when he assaulted her, has said, is like, oh, I don't think he should be convicted or I don't think he should be tried anymore. You understand where she's coming from? Because she just wants to move on from the thing. But the prosecutors in that area is like, we can't let that decide whether or not this person who fled from justice and has lived a great life in France, we can't let what this victim wants, sadly, be the deciding factor on whether or not we move forward. I'm just making myself crazy. His wife was killed by the Manson family.
It's a tough call. It really, really is, because you can look at the Cosby situation. You can say, look, she ended up with a lot of money. And like you said, there's something to be said for the victim moving forward. For years and years of litigation or criminal litigation can make that more difficult. So there's something to be said for that as well. And she ended up with money. It can be hard to criticize it. But personally, I think a victim's wishes should be taken into account for a district attorney. I understand that. I do think that they should steer clear of negotiating when it comes to civil cases or being involved in civil negotiations. That's just my personal thought with it. They can still do things to help a victim, but getting involved in like the other litigation, I don't know. I think it's just a little too much.
Roman Polanski was his name. Roman Polanski is the director. He gets to hang out in France and do movies with Harrison Ford and stuff. And of course, I think the thing was he was nominated for an Oscar and he can't come back to the States because as soon as he steps off the plane, he'll be...
Yeah.
Joe, been great talking with you. But you're the sovereign citizen guy. You know your stuff about sovereign citizen. And after we set up to have this call, more citizens got themselves in the news because they got I-95, which is the worst road anyway.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Walk our listeners through this because it's a fascinating story and it's in your wheelhouse, man.
Yeah, it's right in my wheelhouse. Hopefully listeners are aware of Sovereign Citizens. They're a loosely based group of people, frankly, all over the country, all over the world now, who believe for one reason or another that the United States government is not legitimate, that the laws don't apply to them. There's all kinds of theories, right? And there's different groups and different theories within. And there's a group called, we'll call them Moorish sovereign citizens, who believe that they are actually citizens of Morocco. And there was a treaty between Morocco and the United States in the late 1800s. They believe it gives them diplomatic immunity, also that they were here before the United States government. So we have this group of people, Moorish sovereign citizens, don't believe U.S. laws apply to them, also believe they were here basically before Europeans. Therefore, the United States government, which was set up by Europeans, is not legitimate. All right. There's this particular group subset of sovereign citizens, Moorish sovereign citizens, then this guy who runs a YouTube channel called Rise of the Moors. The first time I watched one of his videos, Brad, he was talking about recruiting an army. He was like, well, there's no point in doing any of this unless we have an army and we have guns. What happens over the weekend is this guy who Rise of the Moors runs this YouTube channel. Him and 10 other dudes were driving from, I'm not sure where he's based, but they were going to Maine to do military training exercises. They ran out of gas on the side of the road. There were 2 cars. They got out to help each other, and the state police drive by and see these 2 cars broken down. The guys are dressed up like soldiers with combat helmets and camo and flak vests on and guns. They all were armed. And my understanding is every one of them was armed.
An elite fighting force that forgot gas.
Right. I don't know exactly how it went down, but the police, it confronted them. I believe 2 of them were arrested right away. 2 of them holed up in one of the vehicles, and the rest of them ended up in the woods. And there was an 8-hour armed standoff between the police and Rise of the Moors.
God, traffic must have been shut down. And I live in Pennsylvania, right across the border from Maryland. I've dealt with 95 my entire life. That I've spent a lot of hours just sitting parked on 95, and I just can't imagine. There's poor people in Massachusetts, and this is a holiday weekend, and they just want to go where they're going. And you have these guys, and they were on the news, and all the accoutrement, and all the signage in their cars, and all the, well, I'm just traveling, I'm not driving.
No driver's licenses. No licenses for the guns either.
We already had scheduled to talk, or we were getting ready to schedule to talk. I was like, oh my God, and I'm going to be talking to Joe.
We could do a whole nother episode on that.
It's funny, but you realize in so many levels that it's not. Joe, you literally wrote the book, and it's right next to you. You wrote the book on sovereign citizens, which I've read, and it's excellent. You know your stuff, but you're a good writer, and you are able to convey it to a layman. And you have sympathy for these people, which is something that you and I have talked about before, because there's a lot of people who have great YouTube shows about sovereign citizens, and it's usually mocking. But don't get me wrong, that's plenty deserved. And you're not above having a laugh at this, but you do, because you're a lawyer, you do take about, it's like, this is what they think, and this is what the actual law is. And understanding that while a lot of it's funny, and, the guy who shows up at court wearing like a headdress and having a staff, thinking that somehow, and if he doesn't cross the bar, that doesn't mean they don't have authority and all that. But you understand, first off, some of these people are desperate. Some of these people are mentally ill. And sadly, some of these people are dangerous. We're having a laugh because it's funny. It's like 95 gets shut down in Massachusetts because these guys are, but they were firearms in their vehicles that they were transporting. They're running into a wooded area. That's dangerous. When you see this, first off, you gotta be like, well, I have like several episodes of your show set up for this.
Yes.
Also, the range of sovereign citizens is so vast, because you have basically white supremacists on one end, and then Moorish citizens, sort of like black supremacists, because I can't think of a better term, on the other. It's like, how are they all under the same umbrella?
It's truly bizarre, Brad. I wrote a book. I read a lot. I've watched these videos. The sovereign citizen movement, I think we talked about last time, grew out of like white nationalists in the 1970s out in the Midwest who were very opposed to taxes and really, really serious into Christianity, right? And they come up with these weird tactics and this whole language, right? There's a whole lexicon for the sovereign citizen movement. What's happened is since the 1970s, and the Moors, and I don't know what to call them necessarily either. Maybe, I don't even know if black nationalists would be the right word. Something like that. It's more like, it's hard to define. But there was the Moorish temple, right? The Moorish Science Temple that was founded in the early 1900s, which was like this movement for, I think it's sort of like almost like a black pride movement in a way. I don't really see any harm in that as it is, though they do hold these beliefs that there was this treaty between the United States and Morocco and that they come from maybe a place that they don't actually come from over in Africa or the Middle East. 1970s, you get into the 80s, and what you see is this melding, right, of the language. Some of the people, I guess, in the Moorish Science Temple decided to adopt this language that they saw these white nationalists using and adopt it to their own theory. And it combined, right? In religion, they call it syncretism, right? Like the combination of two religions. And because I lived in Japan for a lot. Japan is really cool. It's like they have their native religion, Shinto, and then they have Buddhism. And it sort of like overlaps in a lot of ways. But that's what happened here. Like these two ideologies formed. The thing with sovereign citizenship, the sovereign citizen theories, those, it can map on to like almost any type of conspiracy theory. So QAnon, which is like a new movement in the last couple of years, there's QAnon sovereign citizens. Like I've seen people arrested. I'm reading these articles on people arrested and they're saying QAnon told me to do this, that, and this. And then they move into sovereign citizen language. The court doesn't actually have jurisdiction over me and the laws. And so sovereign citizen language in the movement, it mapped onto this Moorish national temple. It mapped onto QAnon. It can map onto all these other different sort of like anti-government theories very, very easily because you can just pick different parts of it. Honestly, that's what I think makes it inherently very dangerous. And it is funny. It certainly is. And we laugh and I mock them to a certain degree. And I have sympathy for some of the people in it because they're dealing with ridiculous circumstances or their license has been suspended. And I lean libertarian in a lot of ways. So I'm like, fight the government as well.
You can understand someone who they can't get a driver's license, but they still need to make a living. They're broke and they're running out of options. It's almost like a Hail Mary. It's like, honestly, these are lives that are destroyed, maybe because of their own doing, maybe not all 100%. So you can understand them going for a Hail Mary. So yeah, but desperate people also can be dangerous as well.
The lead dude, his name's Jamal. I've watched, I think I did 2 or maybe 3 videos on him, but I've watched a lot of his videos. And when I did a year ago, I did a video, I thought he was dangerous right away because most of the sovereign citizens do not talk about weapons and guns, okay? A lot of them, it's like this don't tread on me type thing. Like they're pretty much harmless if they never come in contact with the police or the courts, then they're going to be harmless. But Jamal was like extremely active, like recruiting people, running meetings. You know, he had like this quasi temple room set up, posting videos constantly, and then talking about getting guns, talking about using force. And I made the video a year ago, and I said FBI should be watching these people. Like this is like militia type thing. There's white nationalists that are dangerous. There's all kinds of groups that are dangerous in this country. Well, this is probably one that we should be watching. So it is funny. Let's be thankful that nothing happened. one person pulls the trigger, goes the wrong way. Who knows? I'm just glad that this was de-escalated.
We're in a world of George Floyd. So there's so many different things going on, and the stress levels. And if there's one cop who's had too much caffeine or is scared, rightfully.
Yes.
I would be scared if I was in that situation. If I came across two cars filled with weapons and guys in paramilitary gear. On the other side, if I was one of these Morris citizens, I'd be nervous. And people can get trigger happy and the wrong thing can escalate. And if somebody had run into the woods and God forbid, heck, if at this point they were real close to 4th of July weekend, if a firework went off at the wrong time.
Yeah.
I'm from outside of Philadelphia. I remember Move. I remember John Africa and all that stuff.
That stuff's crazy. I didn't know about that until I got into this.
Again, we're having a laugh. Everyone was okay. So it was okay to have a laugh. It's okay to say, oh my God, poor people in Massachusetts were stuck in traffic for 3 hours or however long it was.
Yeah.
But it very could easily have turned and gone a different direction where we're having a very serious conversation.
Yes.
But it was just amazing that this happened. It was in the news, and I was like, I'm talking to Joe.
The timing was perfect, Brad. The timing was perfect.
And I stand by my statement. I've watched a lot of, and there's half dozen to a dozen channels set up about sovereign citizens. And I stand by my statement that yours is the best. First off, you know how to edit. You give such great legal expertise. And then now you changed your name for a while because it went back to the Common Sense Academy. You changed your name for a while, but it went back. I guess first ideas are the best ideas.
Yeah, I didn't think that the new name was too long. You know, I wanted to use something that described my actual content. Attorney audits agitators, and there's this whole auditing thing on YouTube where like there's the First Amendment auditors, and then there's, I don't know if have you ever seen the show Audit the Audit on YouTube? That's a great channel actually, and that guy, you know, he breaks down police, you know, issues with police and like so I was trying to grab onto that, but I just decided the name was too long, and people were coming back to me and saying, you know, I don't know. I'm not a marketing genius by any means.
You're a lawyer. You have a full-time job.
Right. So I said, look, I already built some brand credibility with the old name. I'm going back. Whether it's the best name it could have been, it was the name from the beginning.
Yeah, this is a good time to plug your pluggables because there's Common Sense Academy. There's your excellent book, Sovereign Citizens. But plug your pluggables because you also have the Joe the Lawyer page.
Yeah, another page, Joe the Lawyer, where that's where I broke down like my thoughts on Bill Cosby, or other legal issues in the news. And then I actually started a third, which is called Tips from a Lawyer, where I'm going to give practical tips on dealing with things like getting a speeding ticket, an issue with a contractor at your house. I get all this legal knowledge bouncing around in my head and I can share it. Now, it's not legal advice, but it is information people can rely on. I'm a lawyer. I got to put the disclaimer.
Don't take legal advice from a podcast or a YouTube page, for God's sake.
Yes. Thank you, Brad. Thank you. But Common Sense Academy, Joe the Lawyer, and/or Tips from a Lawyer. And on any one of those channels, you can find the links to my other channel.
It's been a little while since we talked, but I always follow your pages. And you're a great guest. It was funny. It was just so cool. It's tragic that Cosby's out of jail, because I think most people would agree that he deserves to be in jail for the rest of his life. But I was like, I don't have the wherewithal to intelligently speak. I was like, wait a minute, I haven't talked to Joe for a while. We need to have him back. I'm so glad to have you back. And we're going to do this. Hopefully we won't have as crappy a reason to bring you back as this, but we're going to have you back. It's always great to have you on. And thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you for having me, Brad. And I would love to come back. Maybe come on my show.
Hey, whenever you need somebody to just make smart ass comments and talk about.
You know what we should do is we should watch some sovereign citizen videos together.
Oh, I would love that. That'd be so much fun.
All right, we're gonna do that. That'd be better on my channel, but that's fine.
I'll be there. I'll be on your channel anytime. This has been awesome. that wraps episode 240. Big thanks to Joe the Lawyer. Common Sense Academy is one of my favorite YouTube shows. Check it out. Also, big thanks to Katie. She is awesome. There are more questions to come. Coming soon to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast. It is an escape from New York Minute Reunion as Eric and Molly return to talk about the Disney Plus program, Loki. Till then, in the words of Jar Pardon,
see you in the funny pages.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net.
F off or go kick the bucket.
What happened?